Привіт. I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav, and that's also the name I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. And I've been putting together a series of videos covering Eastern European or Slavic folklore and mythology, and straying into some of the history areas. And in the previous video, chapter 35, I was covering a creature called the Upir. That's the vampire to most people. And I was trying to cover the way the vampire is perceived in Ukraine and amongst the Czechs and amongst the Slovaks. Well, in digging around in my research, I came across another type of creature that could be considered undead, and this is going to be mostly a Polish and Romanian viewpoint. So the Poles would call one of these a Strzyga, and the Romanians would call it a Strigoi. And this was much more connected to witchcraft and also the particulars of how someone is born. So we're going to kind of get into this. The name Strigoi is going to be known to some of you who have either watched the Witcher series or read the novels and the stories. I haven't done either of that. I just happened to stumble across this and found it intriguing. Okay, so a Strzyga, that's the Polish version, is usually a female demon similar to the vampire, except that this is going to be determined at birth. People who are born with two hearts and two souls and two sets of teeth. The second set is like sort of maybe visible. Those are believed to be Strzygi. When a person's identified as a Strzyga, he or she, and there are some male ones, they're called Strygon, they're going to get chased away from human dwelling places. During epidemics, people would get buried alive, because you've got like all sorts of, mass hysteria going on, and people are getting thrown in the ground, and maybe they're not quite dead. And let's say some of those people manage to claw their way out of their grave. They're often weak, they're ill, they've got mutilated hands. People are going to see them walking around and go, Strzygi. All right? And the Strzygi normally would die at a young age, but according to belief, only one of the two souls ends up passing on to the afterlife. The other soul basically is supposed to jumpstart the deceased Strzyga to come back to life, and the Strzyga then preys upon other living beings. So you have to kind of think of it as like a living vampire who does the undead stuff. These undead creatures or living vampires, they're believed to not necessarily fly around in the shape of a bat, like, we've been conditioned in a lot of movies and in literature, but they would take the form of an owl and attack those travelers that are wandering around at night, maybe in the woods, and sucking their blood out and eating their insides. So sometimes the Strigoi can't get a hold of a human. So they're also believed to be satisfied with drinking the blood of animals, but that's apparently only supposed to work for a short time. I suppose it'd be like having a nutrition bar instead of a meal, or trying to live off a salad when you want a steak. And according to some sources, they're not necessarily out to harm people, but instead they might be heralding someone's imminent death. So maybe that kind of gives us a connection to banshees. So now you got to figure out who is a Strzygi or a Strigoi in your village. How do you figure it out? Besides them being lethargic and drowsy during the day, and they're active at night, which is not the time you want to run into them because they have superhuman speed and strength and shape-shifting ability, and there's all sorts of badness there, and the whole idea of sucking your blood out and eating your insides, that's not too good either. Well, you can tell if someone is Strzyga if the dead body was freshly preserved when you dig it up, or it swelled and turned black before burial. There might be a small hole in the headstone so that she can get out of the coffin, or perhaps when you've dug up the coffin, the Strzyga is lying face down with blood nearby and happens to never eat garlic. All right, so let's say you're not in the coffin yet. Okay, how can you be identified as a Strzyga? Okay, if you look different, you're going to probably get identified as one. So if you happen to have no armpit hair, and maybe you got the unibrow thing going, so just like with you, Peter. Or if you are a newborn child and you already have teeth, that might be a bad sign. Or you have an extra nipple, or you happen to have a tail, or maybe some of your behavior might attract attention, such as you sleepwalk, and people in the village are going to point, you're the different one, and that's bad. You could also be cursed by a witch. You might already be a witch. Or you could die by suicide or die alone and unseen, which would probably fit with a suicide. You could also get into some territory that's a bit like werewolf stuff, like being born the seventh son of the seventh son, or the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter. You could have been a child who was born out of wedlock, or maybe you were born too early, or maybe you died before being baptized, but then that kind of gets into the Rusalka territory. How do you make sure the Strzyga or Strigoi doesn't cause trouble later? Well, when the Strzyga dies, decapitate the corpse, and you make sure the head does not get buried with the rest of the body. And that was apparently supposed to keep the Strzyga from rising from the dead. Or you bury the body face down with a sickle around its head, and that could work too. Other methods of protection from the Strzyga, which are pretty similar to protection from the Upir or the vampire, burning the body, hammering nails and stakes and that sort of thing into various parts of the Strzyga's body, burying it again outside of the village and pinning it down with a big rock, having the body exhumed, and that's in the presence of a priest, and bury the body again after additional rituals such as putting a piece of paper with the word Jesus written on it under the Strzyga's tongue. There are some other goodies in here, such as putting a flint in the Strzyga's mouth after it's been dug up and you plant it again, or you're peeling, you have the peeling of church bells, and when the Strzyga hears this, she's going to turn into tar. Okay, slapping it across the face with one's left hand, which is fine for me because I'm left-handed, but if you're terribly right-handed, you might want to practice this. And then there's a couple of things I really enjoy because this sort of gets into the way I look at the Strzyga is it's a vampire with OCD. So if you were to scatter poppy seeds in the shape of a cross in every corner of the house, that's going to serve as protection. Or you put small objects in the Strzyga's grave to make it count them. A couple of other winners that I heard was You tie a bunch of really complex knots, throw that at the advancing Strzyga, and she'll stop to unravel them because she can't really approach you because she's got something to do. Or you scatter poppy seeds behind you, and she's going to stop and start counting the seeds meticulously, which had me thinking about what do you do with a modern one. Maybe if you happen to be in a shop, you grab those jars of mismatched nuts and bolts and washers and screws, and you just scatter them and say, oh, get to work. So there's another one of the undead who isn't really undead. She's kind of a living vampire. That we'll come back to more undead stuff later and more Slavic and Eastern European mythology and folklore. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, it'd be really nice if you did. So, do pobачення.